Despite peaceful protests across the country, despite clear demands from civil society, labor unions, and citizens, the National Assembly passed a version of the Electoral Reform Bill that weakens real-time electronic transmission of results. The President has now signed it into law. Let us be direct. This law represents a step backwards. At a time when Nigerians are demanding greater transparency, greater accountability, and stronger safeguards for their votes, this law chooses opacity over openness. Real-time electronic transmission of results from polling units is not a luxury. It is not an experiment. It is a democratic safeguard. It protects interference. It builds public confidence. To weaken it is to weaken trust. And when trust in elections decline, democracy itself is endangered. We therefore make our position absolutely clear. This law must be rescinded. The National Assembly must urgently initiate corrective legislation that makes real-time electronic transmission of results mandatory and non-negotiable. The key words are mandatory and non-negotiable. The President must demonstrate leadership by supporting a swift amendment that restores full transparency to the electoral process. Anything short of this will leave a permanent question mark over the credibility of future elections. We say this calmly but firmly. When leaders ignore the clear voice of the people, they erode the very legitimacy that gives them authority. Power in a democracy is not inherited. It is granted by citizens and sustained by trust from the same citizens. Nigeria cannot afford another cycle of disputed elections. Nigeria cannot afford deeper public distrust. Nigeria cannot afford reforms that move us backwards. To those in authority, we say, this is a moment to listen. Correct this course while there is still time. To Nigerians, we say, remain peaceful, remain lawful, remain vigilant. Democracy must be defended through lawful civic action, sustained engagement, and unrelenting demand for accountability. We are not calling for chaos. We are calling for correction. Rescind this law. Restore mandatory real-time electronic transmission. Protect the integrity of the Nigerian vote. History will remember who stood for transparency and who stood against it. Where there is a will, there is a way. And where there's no will, there's a million excuses. If correcting this law will ensure that our elections are transparent, are free, are fair, and are acceptable to the electorate of this country, then there is nothing, even if INEC has released its timetable, the National Assembly can, like I said, take on corrective legislation and ask the President to sign it with the speed with which he signed the first legislation. So there is no problem at all. What we're asking for is very important for the peace, for the stability and for transparency in our elections. The question is not one of confidence in the National Assembly. I think the question rather is the need to follow the demands of the citizens of this country. Power, like I said, comes from the citizens. The citizens of this country are clear in their demand that they want real-time, mandatory, electronic transmission of results from the polling units. So it's not a question of whether we have confidence or trust in the National Assembly. It is a question of them carrying out the demands of the citizens of this country. Well, like you rightly mentioned, you haven't seen the Gazette. That's to show you the confusion in the system, that a law was passed and nobody has it in their hands to see exactly what was passed. That's part of the confusion. And I think that confusion is deliberate to ensure that there's no clarity until we get closer to the election. But be that as it may, you made a point that civil society, citizens, and everyone has protested and they didn't listen. The thing you have to understand is that democracy is sustained by active citizens. When citizens are active, it is sustained. It doesn't matter how many times they refuse to listen to citizens. Citizens will continue to engage, civil society will continue to engage, and will continue to advocate, and will continue to speak, will continue to be lawful until they answer. You must understand that democracy rests on citizens that are active. And they that are there, whether in the executive, whether in the legislature, they are there as a consequence of the votes of the citizens. And so we will continue to speak, we will continue to advocate, we will continue to encourage them to listen to the voices of the people. That is what we are supposed to do in a democracy, and that is what we're doing right now. We'll continue to hold them accountable to be transparent and do the right thing until they do so. Thank you.